my name is Virginia Hall, and I'm here to introduce you to Roger Rule, author of The Rifleman's Rifle and host of this series of episodes, Special Guns with Roger Rule.
Thank you, Virginia, and welcome viewers to the 14th episode of Special Guns with Roger Rule.
What type of gun do we have today?
Today we have a Browning Superposed in Diana grade, and here's how we got to it. In our coverage of the evolution of the shotgun, we examined the changes and innovations of side-by-side double-barreled shotguns, from the hammer gun to the side lock ejector, to the box lock, and to the hand detachable box lock, which we call the drop lock. In the evolution of the over and under shotguns, we covered two successful early models, the 1899 German over and under and the improved 1909 English over and under. Both of those shotguns were still, they still are today, successful side locks being built and cloned today. While over and unders built with box lock actions weren't new, it wouldn't be until 1926 when the guru of the gun inventors of all time, John Moses Browning, would finally design a successful box lock over and under that would stand out among the greatest designs.
And that's what we have here today?
Yes, and to support that claim, in their book Gamefield Classics by Michael McIntosh and Bill Hedrick, they dedicate a chapter to the Browning box lock over and under, a gun that Browning called his Superposed. I'd like to quote an excerpt from that book. So I'm quoting, "John Moses Browning was, without question, the most influential figure in the development of modern firearms." Close quote. Just think about that attribute alone, the most influential figure in the development of modern sporting arms. Before we take a look at the gun, we need to see a brief close-up of the man. I was first impressed when I learned he built his first gun when he was 13 years old in his father's shop in Ogden, Utah. At age 24, he received his first patent, which was the first of a total of 128 patents during his life, the most of any firearms designer. Wow. In the early 1880s, the already successful Winchester Company learned that John Browning had built a breech-loading single-shot rifle that could compete with Remington's rolling block or the Big Sharps, which were then using powerful ammunition for buffalo hunting, which, by the way, were big cartridges that Winchester's lever-action guns could not handle. To get into that market, Winchester sent an emissary to Utah to meet Browning. Not only did they strike a deal for a new single shot, but also Winchester's representative gave Browning a challenge to come up with a lever-action repeating rifle that could handle the same power as the big single shot. The new single shot was built under Winchester's name and was crowned the model 1885. Within months, Browning met the challenge and came up with a solution to the lever-action rifle for the big, powerful cartridges as well. For a fee, he sold the rights again to Winchester, who brought it out as their model 1886. Shortly after this, Browning invented a small slide-action rifle for rimfire to be sold to the popular shooting galleries, and Winchester continued their arrangement with Browning and produced the little gun as the Model 1890. Following the popularity of the big Model 1886, Browning adapted a smaller version, and Winchester produced it as the Model 1892. With the advent of smokeless powder, firearms needed to be modernized with stronger designs and stronger steel, and in answer to that, Browning developed what Winchester would call the Model 1894. The Model 1894 would become the most famous rifle in the world. A quote from my own book, 20th Century Winchester Repeating Arms Company. Other firearms historians have referred to the Model 1894, later simply known as the Model 94, as the ultimate lever-action design. It was produced by Winchester from 1894 to 2006, extending more than a century, and is the first commercial sporting rifle to sell over 7 million units. Browning continued his relationship with Winchester and designed the Model 1895, which was a lever-action rifle that could be loaded with point nose or Spitzer bullets, better suited for long range than were his previous lever-action rifle designs. And then Browning added another one to the Winchester line, one that would become the famous Model 1897 slide-action shotgun. Again, I quote from my own book, "Near the turn of the century, the association between Browning and Winchester came to an end. An agreement between Browning and Winchester couldn't be reached in 1901. Browning had developed what would become his famous Browning Auto 5 shotgun, patented in 1900, and he no longer wanted to sell the rights to Winchester, but decided to retain ownership of the patent and receive royalties from sales. Winchester disagreed. With no deal made at Winchester, Browning went to Remington. While Browning was waiting for an offer from Remington, the president of the company died of a heart attack. Browning next turned to one of the largest firearms manufacturers in the world, Fabrique Nationale, in Belgium. Today we usually just refer to them as FN. For the next few years, that shotgun, the Auto 5 or A5, and several of Browning's pistol designs would be produced by FN. We are covering this detail of the A5, although not our subject today, because it was this incident with the A5 that took Browning to Belgium's Fabrique Nationale, where the gun of today's, our subject today, would be eventually made. John Browning wasn't to this point yet. In our chronological account, just before the turn of the century, while he was designing guns for Winchester, he began experimenting with self-loading mechanisms. About the same time the U.S. military was adopting new firearms, and a test was conducted with several companies entering their rifles and pistols. Browning had worked on a self-loading handgun, what we call today a semi-automatic, and he had sold it to Colt under a first patent date of 1897. When the trials began, there were many makes represented, but by 1906, the candidates were narrowed to two, Savage and Colt's Browning patent. A series of field tests from 1907 to 1911 were held to decide between the two. Both designs were modified and improved between each test. At the end of 1910, the last test was attended by Colt's designer John Browning, and over the course of 2 days, with 6,000 rounds fired each, under grueling conditions, they threw them in the mud and things like that, the Colt passed with no reported malfunction.
Wow.
The Savage design had 37 malfunctions. Following its success in trials, the Colt pistol was formally adopted by the Army on March 29, 1911, and designated the model of 1911 and eventually the M1911 in the mid-1920s. It would remain the standard Army pistol through both World Wars, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and finally replaced in 1985 when the military decided to change the caliber to 9mm instead of .45 automatic Colt pistol, namely for increased magazine capacity. Today, I'm told it's back in service still for some operation and has endured for over 100 years. During this first decade of the 20th century, FN was producing Browning's designs of other semi-auto pistols. As he continued his work on both the self-loading and fully automatic fields, he would go on to create some of the most famous guns in the 20th century. The Browning high-power pistol, adapted by the British military, also the 30 caliber water-cooled machine gun, the 30 caliber air-cooled machine gun, the Browning 50 caliber machine gun, and the BAR or Browning automatic rifle. Many of these are still manufactured and in use, and some have become the most copied guns in the world. With all these great repeating, self-loading, and automatic guns to his credit, it is strange that John Browning's final design, which represents the crowning achievement of his long career, is a double-barrel over and under shotgun, our subject gun today. It was about 1922 when he began tinkering with the only break-action shotgun of his own design. He had learned that American shooters had growing interest in the English over and unders and thought there would be a market for an American version. Then in March 1926, when the patents were granted, Browning sent the drawings and working model to Fabrique Nationale, where his guns had been manufactured since 1902. And that fall, he sailed to Europe to oversee the tooling and the final progress for the new gun. But on the Friday after Thanksgiving, Browning suffered a heart attack and died at the FN plant at the age of 71.
He died there?
Yes, and that was in 1926. And because of family setbacks with his heirs, it would be another 5 years, 1931, before the new gun was introduced to America under the model name Superposed. And curiously enough, with that 5-year delay, the big Italian company, Beretta, got into the hunt for this market. But we'll cover that angle in our next episode. Back to our Superposed model, the initial guns had 2 triggers. Browning had been working on a single trigger design with an inertia block principle, but it wasn't perfected. It would be his son, Val, who would finish the single trigger design and patent it in 1939. When the Germans overran Belgium and in World War II, FN ceased production, and so it wasn't until 1948 that production on the Superposed resumed. Over the years, the gun was very successful, especially for a relatively expensive gun. But in the 70s, sales began to slow because of competition from less expensive guns, and FN turned to a simpler version, the Satori, and shifted the bulk of the manufacture to Japan. From 1977, the Superposed has been available, but only by special order. Again, quoting Michael McIntosh in Bill Hedrick from Gameful Classics, and I quote, "Owing to its barrel lump action and underbolt fastener, the Superposed is not the sleekest of its kind, but it is the American over and under, possessed of an undeniably handsome charm. Especially the small bores, the 20s, are particularly pleasing," close quote. And they went on to add, I'm quoting again, "These 20s," they're talking about the 20s, "handle well, and when barreled to a full 28 inches, have handling characteristics that are simply superb," close quote. We're fortunate enough that today's gun is a Browning Belgium Superposed in 20 gauge with 28-inch barrels, and it's in the Diana grade. The grades have been changed over the years. At first they were just numbered 1 through 6, but their main production later became known as the Standard, Pigeon, going up in grade, Diana, and Midas grades, with the Midas being the most expensive. The Midas grade had the most extensive stockwork with the detailed of its checkering patterns, and the metalwork had some gold inlays, hence the Midas name. But it would be the engraving of the second to the top grade, the Diana grade, which is often thought of more highly than the Midas because collectors, in terms of design and quality, like the engraving of the Diana.
And this isn't a new gun.
No, while it looks new, this gun was built in 1966 in the Belgium custom shop, and the engraving was done by the master Belgium engraver R. Kowalski, and it's signed by him on both sides of the receiver.
So this is a 20 gauge gun today, like the one we had last week.
Yes, correct. This is the neat little 20 gauge with 28-inch barrels, which is the version the authors of Gamefield Classics alluded to as having superb handling characteristics. The gun has 2 3/4-inch chambers, and it's marked with a symbol on each barrel indicating that both of them are choked skeet. It has a manual safety, which is appropriate for clay pigeon competition. Also, its single trigger is selective, controlled by moving the tang mounted safety to right or left. When moved to the right, you can see the letter U for the underbarrel. Moving to the right, you can see the letter O for the overbarrel. So let's look at the metalwork first, then the wood, and later we'll examine the disassembled components at the sideboard. We've already said the barrels are 28 inches in length. It has a 5/16 inch standard ventilated rib, which is crosshatched, with two sights, an ivory front bead, and a small ivory bead midway down the rib. The barrel assembly with rib is the only blued portion on the gun, blued with a polished rust blue finish. The single selective smooth trigger is gold, and all the remainder of the metal parts are coin finished with full coverage engraving, heavily engraved with chisel and hammer, deeply and masterfully executed with leaves and acanthus vines intermixed with game animals. You can see those.
Yeah, just another gun with realistic engraving.
The underside of the action are 2 quail in flight with 2 rabbits, or in Europe they call them hares more than we do. And on the, maybe there's a difference, I have never learned it. And on the hares are on the trigger guard.
Yeah.
On the left side of the receiver are 5 pheasants with 1 in flight. And in very fine engraving, you see R. Kowalski, the engraver's signature. Excuse me.
No, you're fine.
And then under is 2 standing pheasants on the underside. On the right side of the receiver are 4 ducks, 2 in flight. And under the duck sitting on the water, again in very fine engraving, there's the engraver's signature, R. Kowalski. We'll have a close-up of that. All other coin finished areas are engraved. The upper tang, the trigger guard, and the Browning version of the forearm release latch, and its escutcheon. The top lever is checkered with a fish scale pattern on both sides. Overall, the engraving is just spectacular. You would be hard put to see better engraving unless it's another Diana Superposed. The animals are realistic, and the leaves and vines are stylized as if they are arabesque scrolls, deeply cut, and so full there's engraving on top of engraving.
It's so beautiful, or should I say handsome?
I'm always calling a rifle or a shotgun beautiful too, and I've noticed many of my gun club friends use that description as well. Looking at the inscriptions, on the left side of the upper barrel reads Browning Arms Company, St. Louis, Missouri, and Montreal PQ for Montreal Province, Quebec. And under that, on a second line, is Made in Belgium. According to the Blue Book of Gun Values, this inscription was only used for guns from 1959 to 1968. For our 1966 made gun here, the inscription is correct. The right side of the upper barrel reads Special Steel, 20 gauge, 2 3/4 shells, and under that the patent numbers were with periods where commas would be. And this is a European connotation where they use periods where we use commas in numbers, and vice versa, commas where we use periods.
I never knew that.
There's your non-gun lesson of the day, Virginia. Looking at the stock and the forearm wood, we'll see immediately that this has a high gloss finish, which was very popular in 1966 when this gun was built. The wood is French walnut, and the finish accents the figure, which on the Midas and the Diana grades vary from exhibition to near exhibition grade. This one would probably be the near exhibition grade category, with some nice stump figure on both sides and light fiddleback green showing here and there, but evenly distributed. Stock measurements are 14 3/8 by 1 5/8 by 2 1/8 over the factory trap pad with Browning's logo, and the gun weighs 6 pounds 6 ounces. Looking at the stock shape, it has the classic fluted comb. It has a pistol grip called a flat knob style by Browning collectors, and this is to distinguish from the round knob version like the Prince of Wales grip. Collectors also look for the length of the tang. This one's the short tang. The long tang version is more popular with collectors. I'll point out though that usually on the short tang version, the wood to metal fit is not as well done as those with the long tang. That's not the case for this gun. Its short tang is very nicely mated to the stock. I'm going to set the gun down. One thing Browning collectors are aware of for guns of this period, a problem surfaced that Browning had used salt in a process to cure or age stocks faster. That story is told in several books, but the Blue Book of Gun Values by S.F. Festad says it as well as any. I'm going to quote this. During the late 1966, Browning's salt problems began to emerge and continued until 1970. The majority of saltwood superposed models from this era are in the round knob short tang configuration, close quote. This gun, built in 1966, would be an early gun for that problem, and being a flat knob version would give us the idea that it probably escaped the problem. Also, the very fact that the stock is near exhibition grade rather than expedition grade tells us logically that it's from the end of the inventory of figured wood before Browning started using the salt process.
Why did he use the salt process?
As I understand it, they were running out of highly figured wood needed for their high-grade guns. Wood for stock making has to be dried to a point that it usually takes years to dry. Browning either had an inventory of much highly figured wood for the future that was not dry yet, or they acquired that type of wood and needed to speed up the drying process to use the wet wood. Someone came up with a plan to use a salt process to cure or dry the wood quickly, and while it seemed to work, it left a salt residue in the wood that escaped back into the metal after the guns were made, causing enormous oxidation, which we call rust, where the metal parts touch the wood. This problem didn't show up immediately, but for our gun here today, we've had this particular gun checked, and it's confirmed that it was an early 1966 flat knob variation that was ahead of the salt problem, or certainly missed it. Back to our description. The forearm is the wide type for competition shooting, often referred to as beaver tail forearm. It has finger channels that are carved into the design nicely. Its 90-degree forearm tip seems to go well overall in design with the flat knob pistol grip. The checkering is very traditional on the Diana grade as opposed to the fancy carved patterns on the Midas grade. For the Diana, the pistol grip has fully wrapped around checkering over the wrist, not just coming together at a point. Because of the short tang, it wraps around under the grip in a novel pattern, coming together at 2 points and leaving a nice elliptical shape of uncheckered wood just below the trigger guard. This actually looks better than the pattern that is designed for the long tang version of the gun. The checkering is point pattern with double borders. The forearm checkering is full wraparound point pattern, very generous, and has double borders everywhere except where it stops at the finger channel. There it has single borders. It is fine checkering at 26 lines per inch, which shows the beautiful green figure and color of the wood through the checkering. Additionally, where the pistol grip checkering wraps around the upper receiver tang and where the forearm checkering wraps around the forearm release housing. The flow of the borders in pattern are superbly done with nicely planned margins. Overall, this is an elegant shotgun and at the top of the heap when it comes to the best of the engraver's art. Here we have our Browning Diana Superposed in 20 gauge. Now let's disassemble it and look at the mechanics. This one has different forearm release than the other guns we've looked at. You just press that little cushion down, little release down, pull the forearm forward, move the top lever to the right, and it comes right apart. Now this forearm does not come off the barrels until you actually have to go through some mechanical. There's three ways to remove the forearm from the barrels. For this particular one, there's a screw at the end of the forearm. That screw needs to be removed. Then you remove the forearm bracket and the forearm by sliding them forward off the end of the muzzle. But you don't need to go through that gyration for regular cleaning. Let's examine the barrel assembly. Note the 3 locking lugs. That's the cocking lever. I'll get that out of the way. The front one has the familiar cutout for the hinge pin, semicircular part there. And instead of one centered chopper lump behind that, it has 2 rear ones, both right and left under the chambers. On the chamber wall, we see a code, asterisk, asterisk, $, telling us these are choked skeet. Also on the left side of the lower barrel, we can see the serial number 49669, and above that is 0 and the Belgian proof mark. On the right side, there's a 4 and the Belgian proof mark. Looking at the chamber end, we see the automatic ejectors, and they're marked 0 or O for over and U for under. Tell us which barrel they belong to. There are 4 areas on the bottom of this assembly that are engraved since they penetrate the receiver floor when assembled. On the left side of the forearm release latch, we see the serial number again, 49669V. Let me pick up the stock and the barrel, the stock in action. Looking at this assembly, we see the locking bolt move as I move the top lever, and you can see the ports where the lugs on the barrel flat mate to. The hinge pin system is very different, very similar to the box lock side-by-side double, and nothing like the trunnion system on the English Boss. I started to say very different than the English Boss. It is because of this conventional locking system that causes the action to be tall, with a height of about 25% higher than just the height of the stacked barrels. On the small gauges, this is not nearly as noticeable as on the big 12 gauge version, as was pointed out by the authors of Game Field Classics. Reassembling the gun, keeping the forearm forward, you do not need to slide the ejectors back like you do on some guns. In fact, you can close the ejectors up against the barrel chambers, then hold the barrels at 45 degrees. Have to move the forearm forward, sorry. Hold the barrel at 45 degrees, and then align the cocking lever of the forearm release latch, slide it back, press the latch down till you hear it click, and it's fully reassembled. Included with the gun is a nice leather Browning trunk case with the maker's name in leather on the outside. I don't think you can see that. and the maker's logo printed on the wool fabric inside the lid.
The way this gun breaks down and reassembles is a lot different from the guns that we've looked at so far.
Yes, and that fact is liked by some shotgunners to keep the forearm attached to the barrels when you strip it down for range cleaning. Let me sum up and use your word, Virginia, that overall this Browning Superposed Diana and 20 gauge with 28-inch barrels is a beautiful gun and one very hard to top. There is much published material that say these guns are still available by special order and are being built at Browning's custom shop in Liège, Belgium. The Blue Book of Gun Values shows the Diana starting at $21,913 and add 20% for 20 gauge or $26,296. And if we are told by the Browning authorized dealer, Mark Murphy of Michael Murphy Guns in Kansas, that these guns take 12 to 16 months to build, and the price quoted is without custom alterations. Why are they still popular? We are told by Erwin Greenstein in his article, The Secret of the Browning Superposed, in Shotgun Life magazine. I want to quote that. The Superposed achieved the reputation of the singular American legend. In many influential circles, the Superposed has become recognized as the most reliable shotgun ever made. Close quote. So for the singular American legend, we would have been remiss if we had not included it in our special series of Special Guns with Roger Rule. That winds up our story today. I want to thank you, Virginia, and thank you, viewers, for watching. And if you enjoyed this episode, I invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and share with others. And I hope you join us next week for another episode of Special Guns with Roger Rule. We will be looking at the big Italian company that decided to take on Browning Superposed and capture some of the over and under market for themselves. If you want to get involved with these types of guns, I recommend gunsinternational.com. The owners are great people. I know them and have been using their website since they started. I find it the best source for both buying and selling any great collectible gun.